Well, let's pick up on that story around the possible cutbacks that could be announced next week in the medium-term budget policy statement. All sorts of commentary around suggestions the National Treasury is about to cut back on the amount of money it gives to government departments. The Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana suggested that any cuts might be moderate. The problem, of course, is that government's been getting less money through tax, and partly because international commodity prices have fallen so sharply. Sort of the end of the post-pandemic commodities boom, if you like. Tertia Jacobs is a Treasury economist at Investec. Tertia, good afternoon to you, and thanks for your time. So from what we know about the numbers, how bad is it for government? How tough is this cash crunch?
Stephen, look, it's not a cash crunch per se. The challenge is that South Africa's fiscal metrics, so that's our debt ratios, could be deteriorating. For example, when we look at government's gross debt to GDP ratio, government predicted that it could be like 72.6% of GDP this year. But in terms of how you pointed out, there's going to be a revenue shortfall, there could be fiscal slippage on the expenditure side. That ratio can easily rise to 77+% of GDP.
Why is that such a bad thing?
Stephen, what becomes important when your debt to GDP ratio rises is whether the country's growth is strong enough to afford the interest rate bill. Because when you look at the size of the budget deficit, government is issuing more and more debt to finance itself, and then it results in an increase in interest payments. So more and more of your revenue receipts get directed to service debt, and there's less available then to be spent on other important services, delivery, for example, and capex.
Is there a lot less revenue for government at the moment? Is it all about the amount of money that's coming through tax, and things like coal prices have fallen so dramatically, platinum prices too, I think?
Yes. So just to put it in perspective, every February, government delivers a budget, right? And it bases its expenditure on certain revenue estimates. So when your revenue then undershoots, it holds implications for expenditure, or either you reduce expenditure or you have to borrow more. So that comes back to the first point that we discussed. So at the moment, revenue receipts are going to be lower, and the main reason is that there's likely to be a huge under-recovery in corporate income tax, of which a large part of that relates to, weaker growth because of load shedding, the logistics crisis at Transnet, as well as the decline in commodity prices, which you flagged.
So then what options does government have? I mean, how big could the cutbacks be?
So that's the very challenging dynamic. And, Treasury is facing that dilemma basically every year, with the exception of the past 2 years when we had the revenue windfalls. When you zoom back to 2014 and you look at what government has been spending money on, every year there's been more and more allocations to state-owned enterprises. When you look at the total money allocated to SOE since 2014, it amounts to 331 billion rand, which is a massive amount. Of that, Eskom has received about 132. SAA, for example, 45 billion, and then all the others are in there as well. So that then forces government to contain spending in other areas, such as services, such as the public sector wage bill, and so on. So that is the very, very difficult dynamic, and that is where the political will is to address the issues at the SOE. Because at the moment we are in such a negative feedback loop. A Transnet has requested like 108 billion rand bailout, right? The SOEs are not working properly, and that's impacting growth, yet they continue to receive bailouts from government, which is not leading to an improvement in the economic performance.
There's so many different elements to this. There are plenty of people, and I think, quite a few economists, sort of on the left, if I can put it like that, Tertia. I think they'll probably proudly say on the left, can say that we could borrow more money, or that we could take money from one of the funds controlled by the Reserve Bank. Are those viable options?
Stephen, the problem is that it's not going to change the main cause of the issues. And what's the cause? The economy is not growing fast enough, right? So that comes back to, if we issue more debt to continue with current spending because there's not enough revenue, The only thing that's going to happen is that the debt to GDP ratio will continue to increase and government's debt servicing costs will continue to increase, making less money available elsewhere. So before we know, we're going to stand again on the edge of a fiscal cliff where very hard decisions will have to be made. So in a way, we are approaching it, hence the guidelines from the Minister of Finance.
I suppose there may be some places where it's easy to cut back and some places where we really shouldn't cut back on spending. I mean, it would seem to me to be madness to cut back on health spending or education spending. I think that might be dangerous. I have to say, Tertia, maybe it's just me, I'll be quite prepared to discuss cutting back on the VIP protection budget.
Absolutely. So what President Ramaphosa also flagged in the SONA 23 is that there's going to be a reconfiguration of government departments. There's a lot of overlapping, so they're looking how to merge some of these departments. So that cutback in duplication will also lead to more savings. So I think that is the dynamic that we have to look at instead of, easy ways to access funds. That's not really going to provide or deal with the structural problems that the government is facing that's pushing us towards this fiscal cliff.
Tertia Jacobs, thank you very much indeed. Treasury economist at Investec. Do appreciate the time.